Hello, welcome to my little studio space. So what we're doing today is a beginner's special, beginner's oil painting special, because you mightn't be a beginner at art, you see, and could still be a beginner at oil paints, because a lot of people would do make art and paint in different media, but they might be used to painting in gouache or acrylic and have their own favorite media or watercolor, but have been tempted to have a go at oil paints. And so this is aimed at somebody who might be tempted to have a go at oil paints, but either can't figure out exactly what materials they need as the basics to get them started and is humming and hawing and sitting on the fence because of that. Or somebody who has just got started with oil paints but is having difficulty getting used to it, which happens a lot as well if you've been working in other media. I'm thinking maybe the most difficult transition might be from watercolor to oil paint. But um, what usually happens is that people might have been working with gouache or acrylics and hear a lot about oil paints or see oil paintings and say, oh, that looks interesting. I like the results and I'd like to have a go at it, but where to start? So you're in the right place if you're one of those sort of people. Now, for people who have been working with oil paint, I don't know how much you're going to pick up here, but if you're like me, like I watch stuff anyway, like even as somebody who's been working with the oils for a long time, I still watch things and see what other people think about materials and everything. But this is going to be just basics for getting you started. But one thing that I think I have a nice little entry point into what your mind is like when you're starting oil paint. Even though I started painting in oils, I think I was 16 when I started painting, and I'm not 16 anymore. Getting younger by the day, but I'm not 16 yet. But the insight that I have is from working with lots of other materials as well, because when I started uh, in art was way back in primary school. And we used to do art classes. And so you had your watercolors, you had your poster paint. I loved poster paint, absolutely loved poster paint. You had pastels. They were usually little oil pastels or crayons and that kind of thing. And felt pens, I loved felt pens. So lots of different media. And then as an adult, I retained a love of lots of different media. But I kind of have a special place for oil paint because oil paint does things that I'm going to move the camera a little bit for a minute. That oil paint will do things for you that other media don't do that handy. And you can see I have some oil paints in the background. I have uploads going at the moment that takes you through the process of doing an oil painting from start to finish and the thought process that goes into it as well. And I think that oil paintings, one of the features of them is they don't always take longer, but they can take longer than something done in your sketchbook. So you can get more into them. Now, they're a dearer thing to buy, and when I'm going through the materials, which I will start doing in a minute, you'll see all my tubes of things out here. And I think this is one of the areas of overwhelm when you're beginning, that you go, I don't know, out of all these things, when you're looking at an artist studio, out of all these tubes and um, pots of things around the place and different style brushes than the ones I have and everything, and palettes and everything. Um, is it all a completely different set of materials than what I have already? So there's this idea of having to start all over again with a lot of materials. So I'm trying to cut that down for you. And the good news is you don't need lots and lots of materials. And the other thing I'm going to do on this live stream is give you hints and tips about how oil paint handles, which is the other thing that I think as a beginner that when you actually get started, when you buy your few tubes, buy a few brushes, buy a medium to mix with the oil paint, you then sit around and you go, oh, when you start working, you go, this handles very differently. If you've been using acrylics, you're going to say, this is really hard to handle compared to acrylics. Same for gouache, and obviously it's going to be very difficult for drawing. You're left with this thing. How do I draw in oil paint? Now, um, you probably have faced all those problems before in whatever painting media you're working with, because, as I said, people don't normally, there's no reason why you couldn't, but people don't normally arrive into oil painting from just going from just working with the pencil and then suddenly they're working with oil paint. There's usually something happens in between. Um, but as I say, there's no reason why you couldn't. Now you can see out on my table here a lot of dirty brushes and palette knives. Okay, they're from yesterday's session on that painting, and if you want to go and see what a painting that used these kind of colors looks like, you can see what it looks like so far. I have two of my most recent uploads are about painting that painting. It's actually to my left behind me, that painting. I've had a little session on it this morning. Um, and I'm hoping to finish it in the next session, maybe. But I just touched the palette and a little bit of oil paint has come off. Now, that's the other thing that's reminded me about it. There's a thing about oil paint, that oil paint, um, well, compared to acrylics, right? Or even gouache or poster paint, anything would be the same drying times, right? Oil paint, this stuff on my palette, some of it has been out since the day before yesterday. So that's 2 days that paint is sitting on my palette. And it's not dry yet. A lot of it isn't dry yet. There's actually a little bit of drying medium in it. So if I touch off the palette or brush by it with clothing or anything, that oil paint is going to go onto my hands or my clothing. And a lot of prep in oil painting is about protecting your surfaces. Okay. So if you're working from home, this is terribly important. If you were, if you had access to some sort of a different room or a studio space that the sort of oil paint getting picked up on things isn't likely to spread too far, you're in business. Otherwise, a lot of your prepping for a session and cleaning up from a session is going to involve doing things like protecting the palette. And this palette, before I was working this morning, had this stuff on it, which you might recognize. I'll call it cling film here in Ireland, which is the brand name, but you might call it, I don't know, is it saran wrap or something in America? But it's a plastic wrap. And I literally just get a bit off the roll and put a little bit over it. You just gently let it drape over it. You don't even have to keep the air out, and just tuck it in at the edges so that it's not you're not likely, like I open the curtains there every morning, I'm not likely to be brushing off it then and transferring paint onto furniture and everything, it's amazing. Paint, the oil paint does get on everything compared to the gouache, which cleans off like a dream. Acrylic doesn't, so you'd be used to a little bit of that with acrylic, but this stuff is amp that up even more. Um, it just has the ability to, magnetize onto things and create huge problems for you. So look, I've got black paint on me now. But the thing is, I don't want to put you off using it. It's a beautiful, juicy, gorgeous medium to work with that just behaves differently from um, acrylics and other painting media. It's got its own thing going for it, the way watercolors has its own thing going for it, and its thing can be really beautiful and it's very adaptable. You can get a huge range of effects, so it's worth trying. Um, and I'm gonna tell you what to get to start. So, you know already about the little cling film trick for a palette. Another thing you can do for a palette, and I forgot to get it down. Can I do it without bumping my head? Because it's up on the top shelf. And that was for quarantining purposes. I work in a really small space here. And I put this up on a shelf because I had oil paints on it and I just wanted it up out of the way. But look at what it is. It's palette paper. This is lovely stuff. If you don't want to invest in a wooden palette, it would be a cheaper option. Um, because one sheet of this, it's kind of a waxed sort of paper. One sheet of that just lasts you days and days because of the slow drying time of oil paint. So I'd highly recommend getting that stuff if you're a beginner. And it's great when you've got this because you can hold the palette in your hand like this if you want. That's what that's designed for. And then if you're working with a brush or a couple of brushes, you've probably seen this in the movies. This is the classic way artists are presented in a movie with the palette out and this. You can do that, but you can have it down flat on the table as well. But you see, your work tends not to be flat on a table when you're working on it because oil paint kind of needs you to have it up at an angle, like this one is on a little table easel, because it's not kind of sketchbook size work normally. It can be, but it doesn't because the nature of the medium and the brushes, type of brushes you're using with it. A sketch pad like this size, you'd lay down happily on a table flat. Oil paintings, not so much. It's a much more physical medium, and you'll find unless you have the painting really held solidly, it moves around. Even that one on the table doesn't have a bar, although on that easel it does have a bar. It's actually that table easel isn't one I use very much. I just use it to prop stuff up to look at. Um, Most of them have a little bit that comes up and down and holds onto your top thing and will move. You can move the whole painting up and down on it. As I say, that's not a good easel for doing that on. Um, and that's because you don't want to be handling the thing with your hands too much because of the transfer of the oil paint makes life very sloppy. But so you're going to be working at a little bit of an angle with it. So that's a little bit of an investment. I think, but we got the palette cheaper, right? Because that disposable sort of tear off leaf palettes last ages because you're not tearing off a leaf of it every single day. You get out of one leaf, you get loads of use. So for a beginner, that's a very good option instead of your wooden palette. But buy a wooden palette if you want, have the money and you want to try it. But that's my personal recommendation. But for your easel, you see this guy here? He's very wrecked. But I bought this guy in the supermarket and you'll notice he has that little thing that moves up and down. He's a box that you can put your paints in. And I'll put him out on the table and show you this way. I don't know why he's a he. That's actually my plein air or painting outdoors set. And it's handy that it's a box because that box will close up. I can put my supplies in to go out. And when you're getting a beginner's oil painting set, I wouldn't worry too much about getting all the plein air gear. Once your first job is to figure out how to use oil paints. Hello there in chat, thanks for dropping in. So yeah, so you do need an easel. So I would recommend these kind of boxes because you can pick them up. You could pick up one second hand on eBay or something like that, but you can actually pick them up in supermarkets. But go into an art shop and have a look at what they have, because something like this, you can keep your paints in it. And if you're coming to oil painting from different videos, um, you can videos. Did I say video? If you from different medias, if you're coming to oil paints from different media, um, you're going to want a place to keep your oil paint separate. So a little container like that, this is lovely because it's got a few purposes. Um, if you want to buy an easel for your studio, great. But the idea when you're trying a new medium is you don't know are you going to be always using it. So we're just getting the basics first, you know. So keep your paints in there, and then on this side, when you turn it around, the box angles because it has those butterfly screw-in clips that you can tighten or loosen. So you can go up and down to an angle that's comfortable for you to work on. And then your painting, big or small, will fit in there because even if it's a smaller one, you could have another small piece above it holding it in. So let's say you were working on a canvas, you had bought a canvas for it. Now that will hold the canvas from moving around too much, you know. If it's a shorter canvas that way, you're going to prop in something, a sketchbook, or just something that'll fit in there that help clamp it on to bridge the gap there. Um, so that's a great item, and then you can put it away at the end of the day. And when you're starting, some people like canvases, but um, I'm going to recommend something else. These are all my personal recommendations now. So, you know, if you can get canvases cheap, that's great. You can get here, you can get some canvases very cheap. But I don't like the quality of the primer on them. To use oil paints, right? Every canvas you buy, that's a traditional canvas, is a traditional surface since about the 16th, I think it's the 15th or 16th century, that artists started working on canvas instead of on wooden panels, you know, when oil painting was invented, you know. And they're great because they're portable and everything, you know. And they're also a lovely, it's like a drum. So it's a lovely responsive surface to work on, you know. But if you don't get one that's really well primed, the paint, I was talking about it on the video that I'm going to upload next, finishing off that painting. I was talking about this phenomenon of sinking of paint, which I find a bit of a problem with mass produced canvases. And what I do is, if I manage to pick up cheap canvases, I will put some of this stuff on. And I would recommend any beginner buy this stuff. This is gesso, acrylic gesso primer. Don't be put off by the fact it says acrylic, because you can use this acrylic gesso primer for either acrylics or oil paints. So it's a very handy stuff, and it's just a white paint, you know, that looks like house paint. I can open the thing and show it to you. It's slightly dried up, actually. It just looks like white paint. You can get it in different colors, or you can color it yourself if you like to start on a painting with a neutral colored ground on it. You put in a little tiny bit of acrylic paint, you know, take some out, mix it up on the side, and mix a bit of acrylic paint into it. I did something with a grey primer on it recently, but I would recommend that you buy that stuff because initially a pot of that might seem a little bit dear. That would run you somewhere just under, say, €20 for a good brand. Winsor Newton is a good brand. Galleria is the cheaper end of their brand. I use a lot of Winsor Newton things. Has to do with where you are in the world, but that is a good brand. And the great thing about primer is you can reprime cheap canvases so that the surface is just better to oil paint on. And I would recommend that you do that if you get a cheap canvas, a cheap primed canvas. If you're paying expensive money, if money isn't an option, and you buy a very good canvas that says it's already primed and it's expensive, it'll probably be well primed, you know. But some of the primers are either put on too thinly, or they're just kind of some sort of sprayed plastic coating that's slippery and unpleasant. And as a beginner oil painter, you sometimes can't tell what is the surface, what's the surface's fault that you're working on, and what's your fault as a beginner. So skip all that is my advice, and buy primer for yourself and work on paper to start. So I have smooth heavyweight cartridge paper here, and that can be primed with um, a few coats of primer, 3 coats, I would say. So you don't want an absorbent paper, and you might know this already from if you've been painting in another medium, that not too soft a paper with a bit of decent body. So a heavy cartridge is ideal. And if you want to know how to prime something, I'm not going to demonstrate priming in this video, but if you go to the main page of my channel, and you look at the intro video, you'll see me painting a picture there, right? Now, that video is part of a series of 3 or 4 videos, right, where I'm painting a landscape from start to finish. And that's the other thing, as a beginner painter, you should be watching people painting. And people you think are good painters, not just, how to paint a rose type painters. Um, Go to galleries, look at the old masters, look at the really best people if you want to be a good painter. Um, but that's not what this is about. This is about how to actually use your paints. So that video, one of the, I think there's a link to the 3 or 4 videos associated with it in that little series. And the first or second of the videos is me priming the canvas. And what you do with the primer is you go one direction with the primer, not too thick, one direction with a really soft brush. I'll show you the kind of brush you would use, something like that, probably a bit bigger, a really soft brush. And you don't want the brush stroke showing, you see, with your primer. Go one direction, just up and down, one direction. Let it dry overnight. You come back, you go the other direction, back and forth, and then let it dry a night, and then come back. Third, 3 coats. And so you've turned your paper into a very nicely primed surface to paint. Okay, so you can skip all the thing about wondering whether your canvas is decently primed or not. But by all means, if you get your canvases cheap, that's fine. The other option for painting on is this stuff. This is a Clairefontaine version, and I'll actually be doing a little bit of demo painting on this today. This is an oil painting pad, okay, an oil painting sketch pad. And a lot of people find these very nice. This one, I bought it and I was disappointed with it. I usually really like things in that brand, and I actually painted that. I think I painted that in a live stream. I was showing people how to glaze using oil paints, and um, the surface. This is paper, but the surface is treated so that it will accept oil paint on it. Now, why do you need to treat a surface of paper at all? Well, oil paint has oil in it. You see, it has linseed oil. So when you paint on an ordinary piece of paper, that oil would leach through to the back of the paper, create a big stain, and rot the paper very fast. So you're damaging the paper, you see, and you're painting. So that's why you need some sort of a primer on the surface. But this paper gives you the paper primed and everything. Now, the only thing I didn't like about this particular brand was that um, was that the paint took about a week to dry on it, and it sort of went on all right, but a bit greasy feeling. And this is, I've noticed this problem in some brands of canvases when they prime them themselves, and some brands of this paper. And this is why I am recommending that you buy a cartridge sheets loose, or cartridge paper, heavy cartridge paper in sketchpad in a size that you like, that you think you'd like to paint on, and buy your primer and prime it yourself. Much cheaper option. Okay. Now we'll get on to what colors you want to use next. The other thing I want to point out about this live stream, if you had any questions um, about painting, you can ask me in the comments, because I'm trying to cover everything here. But, if you've already started painting, you might have run into some technical things that you want to ask questions about and you want some feedback on. Or if you're buying things, and you're just not sure or something. So feel free to ask. I mean, that's what painters are usually going to be fairly helpful to. Not helpful to everybody. I just banned somebody there out of the chat because I thought they were possibly trolling me. So I don't like trouble, you know what I mean? I don't like negative comments or anything in the comment section, but I don't mind people asking me questions. I'm here to help. So yeah, let's have a look down here. So we talked about the palette, a starter palette. We talked about primer, and now we're going to talk about what colors to get. Now, you don't know if you're somebody who's starting oil painting, you've never had a go at it. We'll just assume you're somebody who's never had a go at it, but you want to try it. You don't want to buy a whole load of colors, okay? So just buy a few essential colors that you can mix things with. I'm going to assume you have basic mixing skills because it's not unheard of, but it's kind of a little unusual maybe for somebody to just launch themselves into oil painting without having had a go at any other type of painting and without having any experience at all in mixing colours. So perhaps I'm making a bit of an assumption there. I don't know. While I'm doing this, I'm going to put on another piece of equipment, and this is not an essential, but this is just something I've been using recently because I have been painting impasto recently, which is just painting very thick. And I've been making an awful mess and ended up with oil paint all over my hands and just I had it started because I had a tube of paint burst, and then it just got worse from there. Then I saw these cheap and said, "Oh, I'll just try a pack," and liked them actually. But I don't want you to think you're going to be, you have to buy these and then you have to use a pair every day. Um, I'm using at the moment for the painting that I'm doing. I'm getting maybe 4 or 5 days out of one pair, and then demoting them into my cleaning my brushes pair. Uh, so I mean, I'm not really into somebody uh, wasting a lot of plastic stuff. So it's nice if you can keep things to the minimum. You do not need these, okay? But look at the state of my poor, I'm a messy painter. The state of my poor tubes of paint. This one burst the other day. I have to restate this. If you're somebody who doesn't like a mess, you won't enjoy oil painting very much. Um, I do know somebody that taught me actually in art college was the neatest painter I've ever seen. I've never seen a little speck of paint on him. I don't know how he did it, but he's a person who does everything very slowly, and he might even be dead now. But he was a person who did everything very slowly and carefully. So it might be just a personality thing that I'm a little bit, and I like the mess a bit when I'm working. I like it. That's where the painting starts getting a bit better, when it starts getting on the edge of chaos for me. But you get things like if you buy a huge tube like that, you might have things bursting at the seams and having to tape them up with duct tape and everything. But that's my primary yellow, and it might be a Winsor and Newton. brand, okay? And when you go into an art shop and you're going to choose your oil paints, right? You go into that section with the oil paints on them. This is assuming you're going physically into a shop. You might be buying stuff online. There's professional quality and there's student quality, okay? You're going to buy the student quality, and the student quality is cheaper, okay? So this Winton in this brand, Winsor& and Newton, is the student quality, okay? And it's fine. It's not like terrible compared to Arcturus quality. It's absolutely fine, and I'd recommend it. So you don't necessarily need huge tubes like this because you're not possibly going to be painting very big to start with. It might be a good idea to just try out a few small experiments. The canvas that I showed you is not a bad size to start with. If you do something too small and pokey, you're going to find some of the physical limitations of handling the paint, which I'll show you now shortly, are going to get in the way of being able to work with the level of detail you might be used to working with. So you see this size tube here. This is let's see if it says, it should say it on it, but find one that's not filthy. Yeah, 30, this is a 38 mil tube, okay? And this is a perfect size tube to buy for a beginner, that kind of size, okay? Because it should last you a while, unless you did a painting that was like all blue and white, which there's no reason why you wouldn't do. It mightn't last you too long, but it's a good size tube for a beginner, okay? So the colors that are basic colors to start with in that kind of size. And again, this is just my recommendation. Somebody else might give you different ones, but I'm good at recommendations, actually. This you'd never be able to tell from all my mess on it, but that's a black. And it doesn't really matter what black you get. It's lamp black, ivory black, doesn't matter. Just buy a black, okay? Buy a black, buy a white, and it'll probably be titanium white. You can get, I think you can get zinc white. There's a lead white as well, which I think is banned in some countries because there's a lot of um, toxicity associated with oil paints. You wouldn't be kind of putting the brushes in your mouth like between making brush strokes or anything, and you wouldn't be, doing too much work with rubbing it in with your hands or anything, because some of the colors are toxic. But some people are terrified of oil paints for that toxicity reason of some of the colors, but they're not that toxic. You know what I mean? You'd have to be eating them before they're toxic. That's again, you can look that up and check the facts on that, but they're not for eating; they're for putting on a canvas. um, so black and white, they're two essential colors. That's a primary yellow. And there are lots of different yellows. There's chrome yellow, there's cadmium yellow, all Indian yellow is one of my favorite colors, all sorts of yellows. But primary yellow is called primary yellow because um, it's considered one of the primary colors um, in, the color wheel I'm always banging on about this thing. There are three colors that are considered primary colors, and in theory, you should be able to mix other colors from them. Um, and black and white aren't considered primary colors, but you mix black or white in with them. That's why some of these colors have a darker version and a lighter version. That outside thing shows what the color looks like mixed with black, and this middle ring shows what the color looks like mixed with white. Now that's not done in oil colors, that's done in gouache. But if you want, I do have a live stream, a few live streams on making color wheel. So you might know that already from your color mixing adventures. So a primary yellow is an essentials basic color. The other color I would get, and it doesn't matter that I'm showing you the wrong thing really, because you can't read the labels. That's a phthalo blue, PHTTHALO, I think is how it's spelled. And this is the closest kind of oil painting color to a cyan on a color wheel. Well, maybe you can get a cyan blue in oil paints as well. I don't really know. But phthalo blue is a kind of a cyan color, which is the blue that they use on the color wheel for mixing. So if you were to mix the primary yellow and that blue together, you would get green. And indeed, that's what's happening on my palette here. I was mixing them to get a green. Uh, and you've got your blue and yellow as well, and you can have lighter or darker versions of blue. You can see that going on in the palette as well. So there you've got blue. We're missing one now, and the one we're missing is red. And magenta is the third primary color on the color wheel, but I use a alizarin crimson or a scarlet lake, which is that kind of red there, um, for my primary red, which is a magenta, basically. So something that's in the cool side of the red range is what you're getting, and alizarin crimson does it for me. However, you could go for Scarlet Lake, as in, in between compromise, or what I tend to do is if I find that I'm not getting the colors I want with it, I will also use a cadmium red. But for a beginner, alizarin crimson would do you. So far we have alizarin crimson, phthalo blue, we have black, no, yellow. So blue, yellow, red, black, white. That's it. Okay. In theory, you could make most colors you want from that. In practice, people find that they sometimes get an extra blue, an ultramarine, something like a French ultramarine or a cobalt. French ultramarine would be better, I think, and an extra red, because nothing in life is perfect. And, sometimes you can't get that exact red you want. So you see the way this cadmium red is a lot hotter than red. So there, for extra colors, French ultramarine and cadmium red would be the ones I would choose. And I would also be very tempted to get a yellow ochre as an extra color, and a dark brown, either a burnt umber or a Van Dyke brown, because it's a pain in the neck, slow kind of a business mixing up a dark brown otherwise. Here's what the Van Dyke brown looks like on its own. And to get that color out of the few basic colors that I listed there, these guys, is a pain, because you have to mix an orange up first with your red and yellow, and then you have to darken it with some black and get it down to brown. And it mightn't be the kind of richness of brown that you want. So this is why people buy extra colors. But if you're really not sure that oil painting is for you, don't buy any of those extra colors I mentioned. Just stick with the ones that I showed you. And I might even put chapters in on this so that you can skip back to that section. But do go back and have a look at that section if you're just writing down a list, because you might want to, if you want to start oil painting, you might want to go back through this live stream, the sections in it, and say, okay, what do I need for, the palette? What do I need for the canvas? Not clear on that. What do I need for the paints? Not clear on that. What do I need for brushes? So we haven't done the brushes yet, but before we do the brushes, I want to talk about oil painting medium, okay? Now, a medium, it doesn't mean you're going to have a seance and invite people in, although you could while you're painting if you want, but it might put you off painting. But it'd be fun after. So here's one medium. And I don't have an example of the traditional one because it's increasingly harder to get. Turpentine. Turps or turpentine is the traditional thing that you water down oil paints with. Now, you might say, why on earth would I want to water down oil paints? Well, I'll get into that now. And If I can make space, I'll get into it now. There's a reason, okay? And the reason you need a medium with oil paints is as follows. I'm going to get a bit of the paper, the Clairefontaine paper that I don't recommend, but I just have a spare bit knocking around here. I noticed beside that picture I was doing of the pearl. So I'll show you why you need a medium. And, sorry, I keep hitting off the camera. And I can demo brushes as well while I'm at it. So, this is a typical oil painting brush. This is made of hog hair. It's called Hogfitch. Hogfitch. Hogfitch is your traditional oil painting brush. And you might want to get a few of those, and you will know what shape brush you like already if you've been painting already, okay? Which you might have been doing in acrylics, but if you have been working with acrylics, you might be more used to a brush that's this soft, you know, acrylic or watercolor brush, which are very soft bristled, like a kind of a sable or something. They have acrylic versions that are plasticky things, but this is a natural bristle brush, and it's stiffer because oil paint is a stiffer thing. So this is relevant to my point, because if we have a little look here, going to show you this is an unwatered down oil paint, no medium in it at all, and great coverage and everything, and it's moving okay. Because that particular color, I mixed a little bit of another medium called linseed oil in with it. And linseed oil is what is already in your oil paints when you squeeze them out of the tube. Oil paints are just a pigment like any other paint. And the difference between different pigments is the binder that they put in them. So in order to turn it from a dry thing into an oily thing, they're going to put an oil in it, aren't they? So it's linseed oil is the oil of choice in oil paints. And then you add more linseed oil to make it a bit more fluid. But the thing about linseed oil is that it has a very slow drying time. It slows down the drying time even more. So you don't always want that. And what people do is they use turps or white spirits. So on your palette, if you have some kind of a little container, and I have bought a little thing that hooks onto the palette, and I have my medium in there, which um, isn't actually terps and isn't white spirits, which is the substitute for terps that you can use as well. It's stuff called Sansador, which is great for anybody working indoors. This stuff, I've only started using it recently. Sansador, Sansodor, made by Rinser and Newton as well. And um, it's expensive. This is expensive, I have to say. It's about the cost of maybe uh, 2 or 3 tubes of oil paint. But you're not going to be using very much of it. So at the end of the day, you're going to be cleaning your brushes, but you're going to be cleaning your brushes in white spirits or even brush cleaner, something a lot cheaper than Sansador. But if you're working indoors in an enclosed space, you're probably better fume wise using Sansador, which doesn't smell at all. It's completely odor free and it doesn't give you headaches in enclosed spaces the way white spirits or terps can. And that's why I changed to it recently, because I'm working in a small space. If you're working in a ventilated space, that's fine. Now I'm dipping more into Sandstorm, and look, you can thin it down. Now, I knew somebody who used to do paintings that she used to let the thing dribble and everything on the painting, and that was part of her style in oil painting. She did them nearly like watercolors. So, to know the qualities of what you can do with the paint is very, very useful. Um, and there is a kind of a rule of thumb in painting that's you might have heard of called thick over thin. And the idea is that when you're sort of sketching in something, say I was sketching in trees or something, um, on my canvas to start, or my primed sketchpad paper, um, that you're doing it in fairly thin paint, right? But that as you continue to work on the piece and build up different layers, that you can start working a bit thicker. Now you could work thick right from the very beginning if you want to, but sometimes I see people doing this, they haven't quite got a handle on the flow of the paint exactly, you know, and they're kind of dragging something across the surface that's just a white primed thing, and it's taken them ages to fill in a little area, which they could have filled in a lot quicker. Uh, just, you know, because the thing is an underpainting, they could have filled it in a lot quicker with just a tiny little dab added of that um, thinner, basically. You know, it's white spirits is a thinner of paint. Um, and so is Sansador, and so is Terps, you see. So the two smelly ones are Terps, the traditional one, which is great if you can get Terps, get it. But just don't clean your brushes in it because it's too expensive for that. Uh, white spirits, you know, if you can't get Terps, but they're both very smelly. And then the better option, if you're working in an enclosed space, then you don't want to open windows because you're too cold or something, and it's not aerated well. Sansador or something odorless is a better option. There are other brands other than Sansador, but you know, I'm only talking about the brands that I use. I'm not going to wander into talking about things I don't use. So you see how nicely that's flowing now. And it's not like super thin, the paint, but it's thin enough that I can see my brush strokes as I'm making them. And there is a feel about oil paints that, you know, it's just the minute you start working with them, it's terribly exciting because of the juiciness of it. And you'll know whether you love oil painting or not quite soon after you start. Once you have a handle on some of these tips that I'm giving you. Now, let's say you had slightly messed up, and it's not really a mess up because I use these brushes as well. But say you had your brushes that you use normally for watercolor or acrylics, and you're doing this step, underpainting kind of step, filling in what you want to paint for the final painting. Um, and you're using this sort of brush instead of a hogfish, you might be expecting it to behave like acrylics or like watercolor, and you do this and like paint, just the brush seems to just not be strong enough to support the amount of paint you want to put on the canvas. Um, that takes a little bit of getting used to. So I would recommend you buy a few hogfish brushes, and they'll be marked in some way that tells you what they are. You know, this doesn't say, it doesn't actually say oil paints, but on the stand, if you're in a physical shop, usually on the stand, it'll tell you what it's for. But if it doesn't, you're testing the look of it. I don't have a clean, do I have a clean one to show you what the actual hair looks like? See, this fan brush here is a hogfish. And if you see, that's the color, it's a beigey color hair. And you can tell by the look of it that it's a natural fiber, that it's come off some animal, you know. And when you do that with your hand, it just feels different to the synthetic brush. And that's how you recognize a hogfish brush. But like, ask in the shop if you want, but sometimes the assistants don't know anything and then they lie to you and pretend they know. So you have to find out these things yourself, you know. See this brand here, De La Rowney, bristle white bristle. That's the word for what this is. It's bristle, a bristle brush. Okay. like the sort of brush nearly you'd clean your clothes with. They're bristle brushes, aren't they? So you'd be able to recognize one of those. So one of these brushes feels kind of the same. As for shapes of brushes and everything, I'm not going to give you loads of advice on that because I'm assuming that you've been painting already and that you have your favorite brush shapes. But you could ask me if you wanted to. So feel free to ask things in comments. You don't need to buy loads of extra brushes like these unless you love working with fan brushes. You will notice that I have a lot of these out. And the only reason really I have these is because um, I bought a set of palette knives very cheap, and then somebody gave me some old oil paints a while ago, and this palette knife and another little one were in them, and I just loved them so much that you can paint with palette knives as well. And I don't always like that because I think it can look very mechanical, a finish on paintings, and I don't like very, very stylized, mechanical looking paintings. I like them to look like a human made them. So I prefer brushes, but at the moment I'm working with a combo of brushes and palette knives. So it depends whether you've been working with them already. However, I will say to you that if you're going to have to clean your palette, which you do have to do, even if it's throwaway palette, you're going to want to save some of the paint that's not dry. And on the palette, you have to make space for what's happening the next day. So at the end of every day painting, you're doing a certain amount of cleaning up and preparing for the next day's painting, right? So never let anybody tell you as an artist that you're not a tidy person because you spend half your life cleaning up. One half preparing for the day is sort of cleaning, clearing room and everything, and then the other half is clearing up after things. So what you would need for cleaning your palette is a palette knife like that shape for just literally doing that and then piling it all into a big pile. I'll just do a little small demo for you. I'm actually going to use some of that paint later. But and I love this mess on the palette. I find it so useful. But a very handy trick, you're going to love this as a beginner, is all your leftover stuff from your day's work. If you scrape it up like that, I actually have a lump in there. If you scrape it up like that into a little mess, you have a beautiful color you can work with that's called a neutral color. And that neutral color can be used the next day in your mixes and can be used to help harmonize all the other colors in your painting if you put a tiny little dab of that in your other colors. It helps bring all your other colors together in harmony because they all have a blend of all colors in them then, you see. So that's a wonderful trick, and it's a saving paint trick as well, which you'll appreciate that after having paid good looking money for these things. So that's what you have your palette knife for cleaning up at the end of the day and getting all your not used paint into a little mound, and that little mound can get used the next day. So nothing goes to waste in this at all if we can possibly help it. The other thing is linseed oil, okay? And I have some linseed oil out in this side. This container has two things in it. You don't really need to get one of these. A little jar of something would do you. Um, It'd be a good idea to have something that has a little lid on it, though. That's the only thing. And maybe not plastic, something glass would be better. But sometimes I do things like this. I'll have a glass with a bit of tinfoil or something over it. So just something that's not got spill. I have a huge big thing of linseed oil here. That was a Prezi as well from that old batch of paint. But you don't need to buy this, okay? If you have some around, fine. But I really don't think as a beginner you're going to need this. I'm using some of this in my paint at the moment because I was having that sinking issue happening a little bit, and the surface of my painting was becoming a little bit more matte than I liked. So a lot of the mediums that I think beginners and even people who are experienced like me can get confused about, because there are new mediums that you add to paint coming out all the time. Um, you don't need most of them. You do need your Turp's White Spirit or Sansador. And in fact, you need, if you're using Sansador, you're going to need white spirits as well for cleaning your brushes at the end of the day. Um, but you don't need linseed oil. There should be enough oil in the oil paint as is mixed already for a beginner to be perfectly happy, you know. Uh, and then don't worry about loads of different colors. Worry about how, how can I make my colors out of those basic color sets that I gave you. So we've got the palette, we've got the surface you're working on, we've got the palette you're mixing on, we've got how to clean the palette, we've got what brushes you need, uh, we've got how the paint handles to a certain extent, but I want to do slightly more on that, a little tiny bit more. And you see this brush here, this is a handy little brush called a rigger. And the reason this brush is handy is because at a certain stage in a painting, you might want to draw a small detail. And this brush it's called a rigger because people like using it, or used to like using it, for drawing the rigging on ships, the way they've got a pole up the middle and, you know, little, the rig, basically, um, little lines coming off it. This is something that's quite hard to do in oil paint. And as a beginner, it might be something you might want to play around with for your first few sessions. Thickness and thinness of oil paint, because that is really hard to do with a hogfish brush, a bristle brush. So this is hogfish, this brush, an ivory rigger. Oh, is it? Oh no, it's not actually. It's an acrylic, but it's a stiffer acrylic type brush than the usual. But you can get a very thin, drawn quality of line with this, which a lot of beginners, and I get it as well if I'm switching from acrylics or gouache to oil paints after having been painting with the other media for ages. I get this for a little while till I kind of click back over into it. Um, the it can feel like, it's really easy to lay in big areas with oil paint, but then if you want to do any detail or anything, it becomes very difficult. Um, so that has to do with the shape brush you use and how much of your medium you put in. So for thin lines in something, say I had leaf shapes on a tree and I wanted some kind of an outline in brown around part of a tree or something, or wanted to fill in an area of tree with, dark shapes. I might find that really hard to do with some of my smaller oil painting brushes, but I might find it much easier to do with this with a slightly thinned down paint. So play around with that for your first few sessions, laying down paint thinly and laying down really thick paint and just drag it across and just see how it reacts. So try that out rather than buying canvases for this kind of a thing. Try that out on your primed paper. There's no point trying that out on paper that's not primed, because the oil paint doesn't sit properly on it and it's going to just do funny things on you, and you're not going to get used to working with your new medium. So, what time have we got? I've only got 1 minute. So, I want to talk about cleaning up at the end of the day. So, you're going to have to clean all this stuff at the end of the day that you've used. So, what you're going to do is you're gonna you need a rag as you're going along anyway. Okay, so I have been recently. I got these really cheap. These are just little household little household rags that don't have any sort of nap on them at all. So I've been using them for just wiping. So you wipe your brush between changing colors and everything. And then at the end of the day, you're going to give each brush a proper clean. So to give it a proper clean, for me, it involves going into a completely different room because I'm cleaning them in white spirits and I don't want the fumes in this room. So I go to a side room of the house. If it's a nice day like today, I'm going to open the side door and I have a jar, just a jam jar with sometimes it's white spirit and sometimes it's just a DIY shop kind of brush cleaner. But white spirits is fine. You have a little bit of white spirits or your leftover medium from the day that would have gotten maybe a little bit of dirt from going back and forth dipping into it to thin down particular areas. Um, you're using up everything you have, you see, and starting again with everything clean and fresh the new day. So you're going into the other room and you're going to dip those into your jam jar. Right, let's see if I have any sort of a jar of anything here. Um, See, I've moved them all into the other room because I'm not really cleaning brushes in here. But I have something knocking around. I have herb stuff there, but it's cleaned herbs. I don't want to use it. Yeah, you see, I've all sorts of jars with kind of fairly dirty looking stuff in them that's left over from every day's work. Put it into something like that, swirl the brush around in it, and leaving my gloves on, or if you don't have gloves, you're just using your rag, and you just do a circular motion each way with your brush, so as not to damage the shape of your brush. But then after you've done that and you've given your brush a little wipe, you're taking all your brushes and you're heading into your bathroom or wherever you have a sink that you can clean your brushes in. And you're doing the same with soap and just warm water, not hot because it'll wreck the brushes, but warm. And you're taking a little bit of soap, going back and forward in your hand. Ordinary soap will do fine. And then a little rinse. And just shape them up again and store them upright back in, this little jug. They're all ready to go, you see, for the next day. And then your palette is going to be cleaned with that scrapey thing and leaving this neutral paint in a nice little pile off to the side, and then a little bit of cling film over the top, and you're ready to go then the next day. Or that's basically it. And I can't really think what else I need to tell you. You don't have to buy if you find palette knives dear. You might have a knife like that, a palette knife around the place. That would do you, just for cleaning your palette with. And then for the actual table, I have an oilcloth on the table to protect it. That's great because it's wipeable. If you have a spill or something, it's not going to go through and damage the actual table. On the floor, I have a bit of a lino surface that somebody was throwing out lino and I took a bit of their lino. Now I still have a little bit of paint on the floor. I have to say I have had spills, but I can be very rough with my oil paints. The other day I was doing a painting and I wanted to get tree branches and I did what I call a Jackson Pollock on it. It was a bigger version of those paintings, but it was a wilder kind of a thing. I wanted to be a bit freer with it, and I watered down the paint with my sandstone medium a little bit, and then I flicked the paint like Jackson Pollock would at the painting to establish where the branches were going to be and then started painting the branches in there. But I probably got paint on the wall. And from Inktober last year, I have ink on the wall already. So you can't do art without, some peripheral damage somewhere. It just goes with the territory. And I wouldn't be wearing designer clothing when you're doing it around an old shirt, or you know, you can see I'm wearing an old shirt that, I'm forever leaning on the paintings without meaning to, you know. Um, all that is just protecting yourself from the paint. So it's cleaning up before and after a painting session and making sure that any smells from cleaning fluids or anything aren't taking over your entire house, basically. And if you want to start oil painting, you know what basic colors you can get under, so you're not buying every color under the sun when you don't know whether you're going to like oil painting or not. So I hope that was useful to people. And ask me if you have any questions in comments. If you just want to troll, don't come in because you'd just be banned instantly. It's just easier for me. We artists, we like a quiet life, and we just don't want anybody hassling us about anything. Sensitive creatures that we are. So I hope that was enjoyable and you got something out of that, and that if you've been tempted to try oil painting, that it seems more doable, and it is fun. You can get some fantastic effects in it, and it's a whole world out there waiting for you to explore. Okay, see you folks. Have a great weekend. Bye. Oh, I have to be able to turn this off now. My button for turning it off, you see, is always placed rather badly under the tripod. Excuse me while I move you to the left slightly. Bye, folks.